Hi everyone and welcome to the All Things ITSM Global Podcast, coming to you from Knowledge 16 in Las Vegas. I'm Kirsty McGowan. I'm here with Carlos Casanova.
Hello, Kirsty.
Charlie Betts.
Hey, Kirsty.
And it's our pleasure to welcome Dave Gagen from Navia today. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
So Dave, you're here with Navia.
Yes.
My understanding is that you've been a little busy between the booth and actually doing a workshop on a topic that I think I might have done a little bit of work with.
A little bit?
Yeah, so a little bit of config management workshop. Tell us about how that went and sort of the idea behind of.
So the workshop was, the first part of it was emphasizing the whole need for planning it out and process design, and then we got into how the new Helsinki and future Istanbul aspects are being developed for ServiceNow.
Wow. So you actually talked about planning and config.
Yes.
Foreign concepts.
So tell me, I'm curious to see how well that was received.
Well, for some it was well received.
Okay.
For others, they still have the mindset of, well, we'll just throw everything there and see how it plays out.
Doesn't it? You just put a discovery tool out there, don't you? And that's all you need to do. Then you've got a CMDB.
And I've dealt with some people who have done that.
Yeah.
And then they're still working towards trying to clean it up.
Yes.
So you're saying that we shouldn't just dump everything into this repository,
Right.
all from scratch, because it won't actually deliver value to an organization by just having everything in there?
Correct. Exactly. It's all about making sure that we understand what the business needs from a business value perspective. Right.
So how is Helsinki and Istanbul kind of helping some of that value delivery piece?
Well, I'm finding that they're getting into more of the understanding of CMDB health, like what's working, what's not working. They're getting more into the services aspect of it, which still some people have an issue with, and understanding that we really need to understand the service, right, as compared to just infrastructure.
Yeah.
So Charlie, you brought up the term a while back, when we've been talking about the element versus enterprise level of config management. So it sounds like that's one of the things that you're dealing with, where people are still talking about those element details, the jumper settings, as I like to always use as an example.
Yeah.
So did you have a lot of people, in the session, in the workshop, receptive to that? Hey, maybe we shouldn't?
I think it was pretty well received that way, yes. We had 100 people in each of the sessions, over 100.
Oh, wow.
In each
Oh, wow,
one.
that is...
So it was a definite topic that they wanted to hear.
Yeah, config has always been a hot topic. I mean, people, you will hear a lot of skepticism, and a lot of people, naysayers, people saying it can't be done, and yet you get hundreds of people coming because there is a need there. So what are you, when you say understand your business case, what do you see as some of the top business cases for implementing a CMDB CMS? What are you hearing in the industry?
If you really don't understand what your business is doing or needing, right, how do you understand what you can actually use? Because it's important that we are able to put information into the CMDB that's really of value. And if we really don't understand what the business needs, how can we do that? Then we get into the whole, well, let's dump everything in and let's see what happens after that. Don't want to do that.
Yeah, and once you've dumped it in, it's pretty hard to go backwards.
Very much so.
It's that complexity.
Use cases I often hear are, for example, understanding dependencies in the case of changes. So you've got a patch scheduled for a server, and believe it or not, some organizations don't know the application running on the server.
No way.
Right.
It happens.
Yeah. I don't believe
Well,
it.
it's really important.
And then they don't understand the business and the business
Yep.
point of view, and let's not get into a discussion about applications versus services, but at some point, you do know that there's a business outcome. Or incident management, proactive notification, and there's capacity and asset management use cases.
So again, that's where it's important that they understand how they're going to use the information once it's there. So as you say, how is this going to impact, on all my services or any of my services? So absolutely.
So on the planning side of it, so what are the sort of the main aspects of that you covered during the workshop on the planning side of it. Because I mean, I think we're all in agreement, on the backside, but for someone watching this podcast, what are some of those main key elements on the planning side that they need to really look into and kind of dig into a little bit more?
I think really understanding, what it is you need, how you're planning on using it, and then figuring out, now how am I going to populate it? But don't just go populate it and say, let's hope for the best, like a shotgun approach or something.
Right.
And that is so often the way that people approach it. They think,
Especially
this
from an IT perspective.
Yeah. Oh, this is
we're
what we
all
need.
about
We
the
want,
data.
we
Yeah.
want all this data, and then we want to, what are you going to do with it when you've got it?
Right.
I don't know.
I mean, the server people want everything there is to do with the server, but the reality is, how are we going to make use of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then you find that actually the engineers don't trust it because there's going to be some latency.
Yeah,
And so the
exactly.
engineers still go in with their console tools and look at all the settings on the server.
Right.
So yeah, I'm a big fan of the more minimalist CMDB, and you'll find that I found that it was actually not trivial to even keep the minimalist CMDB keep the data quality up.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really care about the data quality, and if you don't care about the data quality, then people don't trust it, they don't use it.
Yeah. Yeah, the first time they go to it and the data's wrong is the last time they're going to go to it.
It's the last time they go to it.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
And then we got into some of the conversation around, well, when do we put in a CMDB compared to other processes?
Yeah.
So, it's, how do you justify doing the CMDB on its own, really?
I
Well,
don't think you can.
it would be difficult because the CMDB is supposed to be, from my perspective, the CMDB is supposed to be there to support various processes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, as you talk about process and the CMDB, how do you approach that? ITIL, for example, has used some traditional mil spec kinds of processes, verification, validation, configuration, status accounting, but I don't find that those terms have a lot of traction in the industry, but maybe your mileage is
True,
different.
but at the same time, they're still, generally speaking, a good practice to follow, in ensuring you understand how you're building your database or what you expect from a strategic perspective, then figuring out, well, now how am I going to identify it, make sure it's in there properly, and then being able to do the day-to-day maintenance around all your CIs, and then obviously the verification and audit capabilities. How are you going to make sure that you're not allowing unauthorized changes and things like that from occurring?
Right.
I mean, that still happens all too often.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and that's the one thing that that I have been spending more time in is, like we said, it's an enablement. I always talk about it. Anyone that's ever seen me present, I always talk about it. It's 3M, right? 3M doesn't make anything; it just makes everything better. Right. Config management and CMDB. It doesn't. And I was actually introduced. I was with a military client on a military base, and a major in the Marine Corps base said, "Well, config doesn't really do anything." And I wasn't going to argue with him on a military base. But I basically use that example. So on its own, there really is no value.
Right.
However, the value is drawn through change incident, and I think more and more so nowadays with the security component, which it's still not fully integrated, but I mean that's where I'm spending a lot of time is if you know the unauthorized change and you know that on average, at least the last semantic report last year, it's 8 months, of a breach before it's detected.
Right.
There were a lot of unauthorized changes that guaranteed during that 8-month period to elevate credentials to change things. When we look at it, what do? Oh, yeah, that's kind of weird. Just reboot it, fix it, done. That's not. That's what they want. If they're embedding something in the firmware, they need somebody to reboot it. Let's cause a fault because we know what's the first thing they're going to do? Reboot it. And now they're embedded in the firmware. So config, I think, if you're getting to that, and there was one organization I spoke to the other day, they're on a near real-time config management database.
Wow.
It's been several years that they're working at it. It can be done technologically. It easily can be done. But it's that discipline and the planning.
Is it realistic?
For them, it is.
Them, it is.
For them, it is. For most organizations, it's like, why would you?
Yeah.
But when you start looking at the security component of it, I think it is becoming more realistic.
Yeah.
We were talking with someone else about the microsegmentation and the security aspect. If you start looking at that, I think it's becoming a bigger issue, and I really see the next wave and push, especially with IoT kind of being part of that discussion, which was mentioned this morning. The security piece of that, I don't think you can get away from it now.
Right.
So do you see that? Do you hear that from whether it was today or your other work? Do you see people starting to talk more about the security component and config's value in there?
Not as much as I would have thought at this point in time. Ideally, there should be more conversation around that.
So you're still not seeing a lot of, and it's just kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, it is, because it's almost it's your layer that's going to show you what's changed. If you're not looking at what's changing, you're never going to know that someone else is sneaking in underneath the radar and making those changes. If you just sort of accept, oh yeah, that's happened, let's just, as you say,
happens all the time. We just
do a
reboot it.
reboot, we'll be fine.
We'll be fine.
I don't.
Just like I've got one minor change to put in, it's not going to affect
It's
that.
never gonna-
No, of course it's not going to
because everybody
affect
always-
anything.
Right.
But if you don't have that information at your fingertips in your CMDB, you actually don't know that that's going to knock 3 other things out when you make that minor change.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, getting that right is critical to the continuity of your services, really.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for your time today, Dave. It's
Well,
been
thank you very
great
much.
talking to you.
Pleasure to meet all of you.
Yeah.
Wish you all the
Yeah.
best in config management.
Yeah.